It's a real honor to be here today. Okay, can you hear me all right, everyone?
Yes.
Great. Well, first of all, I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsors who have allowed this to happen. I'd like to thank Art Trading, Robin Lowe, and the Commons with Melissa, who is an extraordinary human being.
Yes.
And really amazing. Thank you. Earlier this year, Noah Galadsky wrote an article in the New Republic entitled Death of the Public Intellectual, in which he argues that the traditional intellectual needs to be redefined not in terms of a top-down intelligentsia who descends from on high, the high towers of the academy, down low to the streets, but rather he maintains that the public intellectual should be conceived in terms of engaging the public, a public that he says needs to talk back, a public that offers its own ideas, commentary, and its own theories. In our time, where wealth inequality is at its worst in modern history, where the universities are literally selling degrees and putting massive people into enslavement with debt, making it impossible for us as a people to be engaged publicly, where the governmental power has decisively sided with the banks and corporations against the public for whom it was meant to serve. The figure of the public intellectual has indeed died a death in which their very voices only reproduce these inequalities. There are, happily, exceptions. In an age where the public intellectual in its traditional top-down model has sold their souls to the privileged class, it is refreshing to see that this model has been intractably challenged by a revolutionary who is none other than Mr. Oliver Stone. Oliver's career and life work can be called a revolt to the established privileged order of things, of what the 20th century theorist Theodore Adorno called the cultural industry, in which, to put it roughly, the arts, film, music, media, corporate industry dictate the terms for what culture is, from the posh boardrooms of New York, Los Angeles, Silicon Valley, to the streets below, top down. As a person, Oliver is the embodiment of a rebel whose operations unfold on several different and interlocking fronts, from writing to directing to speaking, taking up his place in the ancient dramatists of Greece, Sophocles, Euripides, who reveal each in their own ingenious ways truths about what we may know but don't want to believe. Here, the dramatist is the figure of the rebel, the philosopher, the psychoanalyst, the director. In short, this is the public intellectual par excellence. That is someone who has the courage to reveal inconvenient truths, and in the case of Mr. Stone, dangerous truths that call into question the very foundations of our existence. From the screenplay Scarface, films like Midnight Express, an Academy Award, Platoon, Academy Award Golden Globe, Wall Street, JFK, Golden Globe for Best Director, Screenplay. Born on the 4th of July, Academy Award, Golden Globe. Natural Born Killers, Commandante. World Trade Center, W, south of the border. In each, he confronts us with difficult and contradictory realities that cannot easily be assimilated into our everyday lives. We, of course, find ways to adapt, to cope with these contradictions, by suppressing and repressing truths that haunt and trouble us, causing us symptoms of a cognitive dissonance that often results in shrinking back into our cells, so our cell blocks of isolation and alienation. We are thereby systematically barred from the public interaction and discourses as democracy falls into the twilight of history. Oliver's work troubles us, prompting us to be engaged, to examine history's hard truths, too difficult to weave into our lives easily, to reclaim democracy and the revolutionary horizon within which the American spirit was born. Where does Oliver's rebellious spirit come from? Well, he might be the only one who can answer that, hint, hint. But we need only to take a cursory view of his life to see it for ourselves. He grew up in a well-to-do family here in New York. His father was a successful stockbroker. So his life needed to only unfold naturally. But this mold was too suffocating for him. this rebel. He was in the same class at Yale as George W. Bush, but dropped out to teach in a school in Saigon, only to try again at Yale, to again drop out, and this time to voluntarily sign up as an infantryman serving in the Vietnam War. It was here where Oliver learned firsthand the experience of life from many Americans' experience from the poor and underprivileged classes. During his tour in the jungles of Southeast Asia, fighting to ward off the so-called communist threat, he earned a Purple Heart, actually 2. He also earned a Bronze Star for valor under combat. Upon returning from Vietnam, he was immediately arrested and thrown into jail, welcomed back to the United States, and then he eventually found his way back to New York, where he drove a taxi and in time enrolled in NYU's film school, where he studied under Martin Scorsese. In time, he worked out his voice, writing screenplays and perfecting cinema, and many years finally found his place in Hollywood. Well, kind of. But his place there was not really welcomed, and in this day remained someone who contests its very narratives. The merits of the screenplay Platoon were rightly recognized, but the industry was reproducing conservative ideologies about America's experience in the Vietnam War, made manifest in films like Rambo, under the conservative takeover of Washington by the neoliberal regime, Reagan and Bush. It's as if that was not enough. Oliver kept digging for truth, going beyond the American horizon and experience, where in 1986 he directed Salvador, and later he went to Cuba with Fidel Castro, and then to Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, and now is presently editing a film on Edward Snowden. From the war machine to the media monopoly, to political corruption, to the surveillance state, Oliver's work has unflinchingly approached topics that are more easily left alone in their unarticulated forms. Recently, I was in the anarchist district in Exarchia in Athens, where I ran into the great Professor David Harvey. And while we were having drinks that night, David Harvey said, "It's my job to show the door to this younger generation. It is our job to have the courage to go through that door, to create for ourselves a future. It is possible. It is time we did that." This is why, after many leading philosophers, theorists, artists, and activists, such as Slavoj Žižek, Alain Badiou, Sigrid Hackenberg, and many others, when we began this school, the Global Center for Advanced Studies, to create an educational alternative that doesn't put people into debt, that allows for freedom of discussion, like we're having here. The Global Center for Advanced Studies is committed to the very same things that Oliver Stone's career in life is committed to. This is why we are so pleased and honored to be engaged with him today in the midst of this course that Eleni and I are guiding, Democracy Rising, in which we are looking not only for the door, we know the door exists, we're looking for resources to get through that door together, working together. So, it is with this and a great privilege and a personal amazing thing for my life to have you join with me in welcoming Mr. Oliver Stone.
Thanks, Kristen.
Pleasure.
That was really beautiful. I wish it was my funeral. It would have been really. I would have heard it. I disagree with one little thing you said.
Yes.
Revolutionary. I've never felt that way. I felt rebel, perhaps, in many ways, but evolutionary, because my life has been so conservative at the beginning.
Yes.
I mean, I was bashing Castro in school. I was worked for I was for Barry Goldwater in '64 when I was in high school. And, I was that way. And,
but don't you feel
it was hard. And it's such a change where I came to, like we were talking a bit in the cab, in the car over here. What you told me about yourself is fascinating. I'm sure you know his story, but it's a discovery, and discovery is the most exciting thing in life. I think. And you know what it's like when you find something. He was in the hospital. He had broken legs, like Snowden did.
Yeah.
Airborne, same issue. Same issue. He wanted to be a special forces. Broke his legs. And that's when you start to shift. You start to see things. Ron Kovic and Born on the 4th of July.
When was that shift for you in life?
So you asked about where it shifted for me?
Yeah, what happened?
It's gradual. It's evolutionary. That's what I'm saying. There's no one action. You know, going to Vietnam twice, seeing a war change in front of my eyes over a 3-year span, it was amazing to see the militarization of a country and what it can do. I think anyone who's been in the military knows what the militarization process does to a country. It trashes it. And I was, of course, part of that system. And I was trying to stay alive, and I was a private. I wanted to go to the infantry in anonymous because I wanted to be like everybody else. I didn't want any special attention. I'd had that my whole life in prep school, in schools, at Yale. I mean, that's one of the reasons I withdrew from Yale. I wasn't doing very well. I wasn't happy, but above all, it was the sense of elitism, the sense that, you know, that thing you pick up in prep school that's snarky and put down people, put down everything, and it's that George Bush thing that drove me crazy. But Bush had it, so did all his compadres. And they came from entrenched families, from privileged families. My father wasn't that way. He didn't have that kind of clout, but he was, you know, a stockbroker who did very well in life. My mother was French, so I had a worldview because I'd gone over to France as a boy. And the French are more liberal. They were anti-American back in the 50s because of NATO. I mean, it was Charles de Gaulle withdrew from NATO. All this made an impression on me that you could be independent and European, which I don't see anymore in Europe. I really don't feel it when I go there.
There's a military background in your family too. Grandfather,
father? Yeah. Grandfather, French side of the World War I, and Dad was World War II, a lieutenant colonel. He was on SHAPE, the Eisenhower staff. He was in economics and very good at it. And he had Eisenhower would have been his idol during those years, and it certainly were. They were good years for Americans. We were prosperous, so to speak, and we're doing very well. And the world was seen through that sphere. And of course, Castro and Kennedy were upsetting to that sphere. And that's what took me a little bit. I was against those people. And then going to Vietnam opened my eyes gradually. You don't walk away from a war and say, gee, that was awful. You just don't. It doesn't dawn on you. You're too shocked and you're too numbed out. Ron Kovic took a long time, although he was castrated and paralyzed. So it took him several years to make that divide to 1972. But in my case, it was even longer. Went back to film school, saw the world through the prism of film. And then there were protests in NYU. They broke into it. Never saw them to a socialist school. It was in the sense that Cambodia invasion happened in '71, and the student body went nuts and trashed the school, fired all the teachers. They wanted all the teachers out, and they took all the equipment. And it was an example of a revolution in chaos. It didn't work because the stronger-minded people took over. There was a lot of bullying. There was a lot of black versus white stuff going on. It was ugly. And all the cameras got broken. All the equipment was ruined. The film school took a couple of years to recover. It was not easy. But we shot stuff in the streets and saw the protests. The Wall Street people, the famous Nixon gang, actually beat us up. And they broke a couple of the cameras.
Were you part of those protests?
I was on the fringes. I was a cameraman at that time. But I didn't lose the camera.
What did Martin Scorsese have to say about your film and your work with him?
Well, we were working on a collective film which was released at the New York Film Festival called something Street Protest 71 or something. It was made by the collective, and he was running it. I can't say he was a revolutionary, but he had long hair and a beard, and he went off to do the films in L.A. We all admired him. He was a very good teacher, very energetic, and he was very helpful to me because he praised one film I did called Last Year in Vietnam, which was one of my early student films, and it's on YouTube. It's not good quality, but it's a lot. 12 minutes of a man returning to New York, played by me, and what it's like to be alone and isolated. It was sort of an early taxi driver, prototype of taxi driver, and but I suffered in the sense that coming out of film school I couldn't get anything going. so I kept working. I had a wonderful first wife who was really very supportive.
Even while you're driving a taxi
and other things, messenger boy. I was in a office. I was a sports company production for a while, and then I was a production assistant on some pornos and some Channel 13, some good films. I did everything, anything I could, just struggling to get along.
And how did you come to your voice? Through writing or through film, through the image?
I kept writing the whole time. I mean, I always loved writing. I started a novel when I was 1966 called Child's Night Dream.
This is before Vietnam.
And this was between the two Vietnams. And then I actually published that novel. I went back to it 30 years later. It was published by St. Martin's in 1997. And it did pretty well, actually. It went around the world, sold. It's an interesting book. It's a view of a 19-year-old boy in the world. And honest. It's very honest about his parents, the world, Vietnam, Merchant Marine. I was in the Merchant Marine, too. So I was just engulfed, I was taking in life, but I was processing. But I would say the 1970s, in that period, being exposed to New Yorkers, many of them women with enlightened views, more progressive views than I had, changed my outlook. So by the time that Carter,
There's some sound back. Sorry.
Okay, should I keep going?
Yes, please.
By the time Jimmy Carter was in New York in 1976, it was a wave of enthusiasm for change. And it was evident in the streets. You felt it everywhere in New York. Of course, I didn't realize how liberal a city New York was when you compare it to the rest of the country. And in fact, I didn't have a great sense of the rest of the country because we didn't talk politics in Vietnam or in the Merchant Marine. It was generally apolitical. So Carter was a huge bump. And then, of course, very much like Obama, there was a tremendous letdown. As you know, Carter's policies were compromised, and Reagan took over, and the world was never the same after Reagan. At first, I supported him because I thought he would bring strength back to America, and I felt like we were losing it. How wrong I was. I mean, it was a false strength. It was a strange strength. I didn't know about the Central American wars. All this I came to in the 1980s, really, during that period when I started to work. Salvador was I did 2 horror films, and then they didn't do very well, but I survived. I had Midnight Express, and I wrote Conan the Barbarian, I wrote Scarface. I had quite a bit of heat as a screenwriter, because I'd always been writing. I wrote, and even when I was down on my luck, I've always managed to turn out like 2 screenplays a year, send them out, get rejections everywhere, dozens of rejections. I think I must have had several hundred by the time I finished. It's pretty hard business to make it from outside.
What made you keep writing with these rejections?
This desire to distinguish, to find my voice, maybe, to find what am I about, why am I here?
You feel like you found that voice?
Still looking. No, I mean, you work all your life towards evolution. You deepen your views, you refine your views, you edit yourself. I'm editing myself today on this stage. I might change one of my dialogue. I might say something different. You're always you're alive. You're aware. You're trying to be aware, and that's hard. Always to be aware. So let's say by the mid '80s, when Richard Boyle, who I knew from COVID. See, I'd written Born on the 4th of July in 1978-9. 10 years before it was made, and I wrote Platoon in 75-6, and you see this new voice emerging. But it was unable to make those movies. Born on the 4th of July came to the lip of being made. We were rehearsing the film with Al Pacino here in New York in 78, 79, and it fell apart with 2 weeks to go. It was most depressing. Most depressing.
How did you get over that kind of depression, that kind of
it's hard.
rejection?
I just didn't feel like I'd ever make it. I mean, here Rambo's are being made, the horrible Chuck Norris films all about Americans missing in action in Vietnam. You have 2,000 Americans, and they're all talking about that. And nobody talks about what happened over there as a gigantic mess, as a disaster caused by basically us. Anyway, so my scripts are sitting in the closet. It's very depressing time. You know, you have to understand, you have to live with frustration if you want to be a writer or a director. Really, it's tough. I gave up mentally, in a sense, like you can't do anything about this. This is not a system that wants any kind of reality. And,
Sure. Do you mind using
oh,
this?
I'm sorry, not hearing anything. Then in that case, I might take my jacket off,
Please,
because it is hot. So I'm just giving you specific moments, emotional moments. Before the lady came, what was I saying?
Secret. Oh, and rejection, working through rejection.
Okay.
How do you get through those moments of
Yeah, but overall, I mean, I had been recognized as a writer with the Midnight Express screenplay, but it was the stuff I wanted to do about Vietnam was not doable, and the other scripts were not doable. So I was very frustrated, and the lie about Vietnam, the mythology, especially Stallone and Chuck Norris, was it caused despair. Thank God, believe it or not, in the middle of all this, I wrote a script for Michael Cimino called Year of the Dragon, about the Chinese-American gangsters in Chinatown, which was a drug-related movie. And it was interesting. I met all the gangsters down there. I know they don't have gangsters in Chinatown. I know that.
I don't belong to them.
But no, in the banks, I met the bankers. It was really fascinating. I got very fat because we had so many feasts in the associations down in Chinatown. I mean, we had 12-course dinners just to sit there for the research. Finally, we ran into a dissident Chinese guy who was on the outs with we got a lot of information. Anyway, made the movie, but Michael loved Platoon, wanted to make it, he wanted to produce it and wanted me to direct it. He had done Deer Hunter, which was a fine film, although it was a metaphor for Vietnam. It wasn't realistic. Right. And it was his backing Okay, it was his backing. I can just talk. I think the room's small enough. Yeah. It was his backing that allowed that to come out of the closet again, and it was not made again. It was another heartbreak. It was a lie. There were lies told to me and all this. I almost made it, cast it, almost came to the lip, pulled back. So then at this point, you know, you're crazy. It feels horrible. Scarface was a controversial film. I was not working as much. I was on the outs again because I had been so vulgar. I was considered vulgar and crude, and You're the Dragon was sort of treated the same way. So, you know, you want to give up. I wrote Salvador because I'd run into Richard Boyle, who was a friend of Ron Kovic's. Richard Boyle is a character, journalist from Vietnam. He covered the Central...
Jim Belushi? Was that
Yeah.
Jim Belushi's
No, that was Jimmy Woods.
Okay.
And Boyle had covered the Central American Wars and told me some crazy story about Salvador. I went down there with him. Long story short, we tried to finance it out of Salvador as a cheap, low-budget movie. And we almost pulled it off with the military equipment, lying to them, telling them we were making an anti-Marxist movie. And then we were going to shoot the other section in Mexico with the rebels, the FMLN. It was quite a story. We came close until our advisor got killed. He was shot on the tennis court. Yeah, he was playing tennis, and they walked up to him, the FMLN, and they shot it, blew his brains out. So anyway, we went. At that point, I got lucky. An Englishman, a boxing promoter called John Daly, loved these two scripts, Salvador and Platoon, and he said basically to me, the dream of any young filmmaker. He says, "Which one do you want to do first?" I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. I said, "Well, I'll take Salvador because I know if I say Platoon, it's never going to happen. It's going to fall apart again. So let's start with Salvador." And I ended up doing Salvador. And the crazy story, Boyle was a character out of all time. I made a comment. There's a documentary about it on the DVD of Salvador. It was an amazing film to pull off. Anyway, it had some success, critical success, no money. Failed at the box office. It was described as in the Times as a leftist tract, like Costa Gavras and so forth. But Platoon did take off immediately, and I don't know why. It was just there's always a misunderstanding between the audience and the filmmaker, always in any hit. And honestly, and it was just one of those things that caught the wind and the flame of the time, and as a result, the film went around the world. It was a huge hit, and from then on, I could direct, and I went fast because I never knew if it would last, and I did 10 films in 10 years, which exhausted me. But they were really, each one got more progressive in its thinking. You know, the JFK clarifies a tremendous issue, and I didn't even understand the full implications of it until later in my life, when I went recently to this Untold History of the United States, which is 12 hours, with a historian, Peter Kuznick. And I spent 5 years really for the first time, like you did, going and studying history, American history, because I'd done it cursorily back in school, and I didn't really know the details. Peter who's a leftist, has been studying this stuff for years and teaching it at American University brilliantly, by the way. And I loved his take on it, and we went into that world. And it was the most exhausting effort I ever made in terms of 5 years, nonprofit kind of a deal, like you do it, you know. And it was really, it brought its own rewards, because I know more than I ever did, and that's sort of what my journey was about. Figuring it out, learning more, not going to sleep on it, not becoming just a hedonist, right. You know. Making money from Hollywood, yeah, but that's not enough. It's the people don't, so many of the people in Hollywood are just interested in money and in ripping off the public. In a sense, not ripping off, they don't see it that way. They see themselves as good Americans, so they make films that are always from the American point of view, and this is the biggest failing of Hollywood. You can make money doing that. You have a much harder time making success with films that are critical of the U.S. And that is it's a stake that's been driven into my heart. You know, I pay the price for it. But I've kept, as much as I can, I try to make films that are entertaining. And no matter what you do, I'm a dramatist, but I also, as you know, I have a voice as a citizen. But I think I learned the difference between the two. And I've said many things I regret publicly, because I shouldn't have done them for the good of the film. But and people have labeled and typecast and all that. But I continue to persist and try to be a little bit more diplomatic as I go.
Do you feel your voice is being heard more now than it was, say, in the 90s or 80s?
Oh, I was more impact in the box office side in the 80s and 90s, yes. But and obviously a lot of media has been aggressively against my speaking out. Absolutely. I understand that. But I've managed to survive and still make films. And the Snowden movie is an interesting, just briefly I'll tell you that we did not get studio backing for any of this movie. It wasn't the first time. I mean, I've made films outside that. I made W, the film about George Bush, which I'm very proud of, but we had to struggle to make it. No studio would touch it. We got Chinese, 55% of the money came from Hong Kong, from the Chinese, which is great. He was drunk that weekend, but it was, he liked my films. Anyway, we got to, and Europe and Hong Kong, so, but it didn't do as well because George Bush was the most unpopular man in the universe in 2008 when we came out, so we had our timing wasn't good, but the film continues to play. I'm very proud of it. But this Snowden was another nightmare. Nobody in the U.S. System, the script was good, the budget was reasonable, the cast was good. They wouldn't touch it. Studio head said, yeah, we want to make it. A few days later, word comes back, no calls back. It's the corporate boards that are the problem. All these companies are more and more governed by these corporate boards. And if there's a few board members who are against Snowden, of which there are many, many Americans, the word came down, no. And these are big companies, corporations, you know, Comcast and Sony and all these. They don't want to piss off the U.S. government. That's what they're feeling. And it's self-censorship. It's not that the NSA is calling them and saying you can't make the movie. It's self-censorship, and that's always the problem in Hollywood. In fact, they're worse. I mean, McCarthy had much more effect in the 1950s because Hollywood took him so seriously and killed itself. We killed so many good writers and progressives off, and they had to struggle back. They always did, right? But Hollywood is always more conservative in some ways because they have a wide audience to please, and they always worry about some proverbial film goer in Ohio who carries a gun and hates abortion, stuff like that. So they won't touch these things. Anyway, with Snowden we eked it out. we had to cut our budget, trim it, and we got tremendous support from France, which has always been good for me, and from Germany, always good to me. So we got a base there, and we got a very good distributor in the U.S., Open Road, which is a company that is partially owned by theaters, and its chairman is very progressive in his thinking, Tom Ortenberg, and we were able to eke out this movie. But I have to say, all the way down the line, it was incredible. I mean, for example, we're shooting in Germany because we don't want to be exposed in the U.S. So we move our interiors to Germany. We shoot exteriors in Hong Kong, Washington, D.C., and...
Is it a biopic of Edward Snowden? Or you don't want to talk about it?
It is. Many points of view brought together. We got a lot of stories, okay. And it does trace the reasons why and he did it, and who he was. I think a very strong view of it presents a point of view. It's not one of these wishy-washy films that, like Fifth Estate was, which was a good film, but I think I don't know if it was a correct really what happened. Nor can you tell with Snowden either. It's a mystery. This whole thing about surveillance is a mystery still. A lot of it is unexplained, and a lot of it we don't know. We assume the worst. But you'll see the movie. But the point is, we've got it made. But even at the very end, when we were in Germany, of all places, BMW had cooperated with our German partner on every film. They give the cars, they give support. It's a German, very proud of their country. We could not get BMW Germany to sign off because their American partner, BMW America, said, "Don't touch this film." Errors and omissions insurance couldn't get it. You need that to make a film outside the studio system. You have to cover yourself with all the bankers. You have bank loans coming from 7-10 different countries. You got to close a loan. You don't have any errors and omissions insurance. You can't make the movie. So we literally scoured the world, and we got our E&O insurance from Australia's company, and we closed the loan 7 days before we're shooting the movie. It's very difficult to make a movie like that. You need to have some pre-production, you need confidence, you need to have a system that works, and that's why the studio system works so well. They can they can float cash. So my producer and I were out everything, we're out credit cards and all that, keeping this afloat, telling actors we're going to make the movie, building sets that are very expensive. Yeah, it's crazy time. So it was a tough film, but that's the problem. Why can't we make a Snowden in this country? I mean, for Christ's sake, he did it for the American public. Let him tell his side of the story. So you can't do that. And I couldn't get Untold History of the United States on national public radio. We could not get an interview. Peter and I. It's a factual book. We have 25 famous historians endorsing the book, and we could not get on NPR. Why? Ever since Chavez, I don't think they banned, since I did the documentary South of the Border, I have not had a good reception there. They hated the Venezuelan government.
Do you think it's harder nowadays to...
And on mainstream television, forget about it, even right. Close.
Exactly.
So we got lucky. Showtime, premium cable, picked us up because they liked the idea, and they actually did very well with it. And several million people saw it on cable.
Is it harder nowadays to, and we'll open the floor up for questions, conversation here in a bit. Is it harder nowadays to be a kind of rebellious, let's use your term, my term, your term that we agree on, a rebellious filmmaker, a rebellious...
Yeah, but it always was hard. It was hard in the 70s. I mean,
was it easier in the 70s than it is now, or there's the same structure?
It's the same thing. It's because we're ignorant of our own history, where we don't want to know.
Why are we ignorant of our own history?
Because there's not enough people like you teaching it. There are some great teachers.
Were you writing it?
There's some great teachers, Peter and I went around to colleges. We went to high schools. We really canvassed the country. We tried hard to spread the film. And we went to the National Student Social Teachers Convention in St. Louis. They've invited us back. Union leaders. I mean, we've made a real effort to break into the school book world too. It cost us $1 million just to get into that race in California, to get into the books. You can't afford it. Texas is impossible, as you know. The Texas school boards. So, I just want to say that at the college level, you can get this information. Peter's teaching it, so many intelligent professors, but that's high-level college, At the high school level, you can't get it. And I read my daughter's textbooks, history books. You can't even get Hiroshima and Nagasaki right because, our theory and what we proposed it. And it's a theory, but it's based on a lot of facts. You can't get that because in American textbooks, they drop the bomb here, they talk about the nuclear race there, they fracture it because it's written by committees, 10, 12 people write these books, and everything has to be vetted. So by the time you get it through, it's so conservatized, you can't say anything radical because some parent in some school in Oklahoma is going to go nuts, or in Oregon. What I'm saying, it's impossible to make a new history because we can't, but this is true of Japan. We went to Japan many times, and Peter's been going for 20 years. They don't even know about the bomb. They don't know about their aggression in World War II in Asia. China has its own problems with its history. It censors itself heavily. In China, you can talk freely about the U.S., but you can't talk about China in a critical way. You can't even talk about Mao. So the world is locked up. I think Germany is one of the best examples I've seen in my travels of a populace that has been educated about World War II. But you have to start, at least in this era, with World War II, because unless you understand World War II, you can't understand what we're doing with the Russians in Ukraine, and why we have this enemy, this constant enemy, why we become this frigid nuclear power. World War II is really important, and we don't even have that basic understanding. We don't understand that the Russians won the war in Europe and contributed greatly to the war in the Pacific. So we don't get that, and the kids don't know it. As a result, I'm tying it all together, Now I'm told by Peter that 50% of the American kids, they were polled recently, believe that Vietnam was an honorable war. More than 50%, 51%. And meanwhile, Americans, 30% approve of Snowden. We took this poll for our film. In Germany, 80% of the populace appreciates Snowden because they have lived through a surveillance state, as you know. So, and they know their World War II history. They know what happens when tyranny and fascism set in. In America, we don't have that knowledge. We don't know what war is. We don't know what war is. We send people to war. We have a lot of armchair patriots like Mr. Cheney, and Mr. Obama too, and Bush. Yes, I made a movie about him. Yeah, he was the bane, the devil of the 21st century. He really turned it around. But I don't know. I think we were already on that path for sure. I think his father made a huge mistake when he committed 500,000 American troops to the Middle East in 1991 because we were fighting Hitler, and supposed Saddam was Hitler. He made a big publicity campaign. But sending 500,000 troops to the Middle East was insane. And in 1965, when Johnson hit that 500,000, or 66, hit that mark, American public was really upset about it. There was no protest whatever in 91 when Bush did that. But that altered forever the balance of America because we were now the superpower. We were the dominant sole superpower. Russia, Soviet Union had vanished in terms of its impact that year. That same year, we put 500,000 troops in the Middle East. That was a disastrous, epochal event, and nobody said anything about it, except for Osama bin Laden and a lot of other people who were pissed off because it was their land and their holy land.
Do you feel like in America we are in danger of the kind of a certain form of fascism, a lukewarm fascism?
Lukewarm? What are you talking about, lukewarm? On that one, I'm going to disagree with you. We worship power. We worship money. Our police forces worship weapons. They're no longer policemen. They're soldiers. I mean, we're into it. Look at television. Look at everything. It's about violence. It's about setting it straight, getting revenge. Beating some bad guy that you invent for television, or it's all over the place. I mean, we're really incipient. I mean, it is an environment that's very 1930s sick. It's a disease. I mean, we have shooters everywhere. Every week we have a shooter. I mean, we have a worship of guns too, which is inordinate. I've never seen it everywhere in the world. There's not one country that allows guns like this. Nowhere. So what do you mean fascism? I mean, it's benign, as Jim Garrison said in JFK in his wonderful speech. It's a benign fascism. But it works. We're very good at subtlety. We're not heavy-handed. We have the best soft power mechanism in the world. The CIA is expert at this. The Americans always create this media story that we're threatened and we're under siege, we're struggling to get our point of view across. The opposite is true, is we're so good at it.
Yes.
That we intervene in every government we can in the world. We have intervened successfully in about 80% of these things. And we control the mechanisms of the power through our financial systems.
Do you think it's your responsibility as a...
No. I'm talking to you, a small crowd here. You can't say this in Congress or anything like that. You go crazy. They lynch you.
With your films, you bring these issues.
No, you have to do it subtly and you have to make it entertaining. But how can you beat American Sniper? I mean, it's a well-made film. It's very well executed. Most of the war films are well done. Certainly Black Hawk Down, I think, was a prime film like Patton was. Black Hawk Down is